We're now just 7 hours from Trump's trade deadline as countries are trying to make deals with the United States or face significantly higher tariffs. Remember, President Trump in early April paused most of his so-called reciprocal tariffs, but time, as it does, moves ever forward and has brought us to the precipice of this new deadline, August 1st. Developments so far today as the clock ticks toward midnight. Trump announced a 90-day pause on higher tariffs on Mexico, so tariffs will remain at 25% for Mexico instead of going up to 30% as threatened. And while Trump this week did lock down a majorly important trade agreement with the European Union, there are many other countries who, as of now, remain deal-less.
Of our 18 major trading partners, 2/3 of those trading partners have a deal. We've sent out 17 letters to countries around the world. And the rest of those countries that either do not have a deal or have a letter, they will be hearing from this administration by the midnight deadline tonight.
One major trading partner without a deal as of now is Canada. Trump saying on Truth Social today that Canada's decision to recognize a Palestinian state, quote, will make it very hard for us to make a trade deal with them. Oh, Canada. On the heels of this, the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all closed down in the last hour as Trump seeks to close more trade deals. Can all of his tariffs survive the legal system? That's another question, because today a federal appeals court is hearing arguments in a major case arguing that Trump overstepped his legal authority, imposing many of his sweeping tariffs instead of Congress doing it. The lawsuit is brought by small businesses and represented by some very big shot attorneys, including a former acting U.S. Solicitor General who's going to join us in just a moment. But let's bring in CNN's resident tariff expert, Mr. Philip Mattingly. Phil, walk us through what 11th hour trade deals could still happen before deadline hits.
I think all eyes right now are on the Canada-U.S. relationship. Obviously, the president has made pretty clear that the optimism, or any optimism for a potential agreement, would seem to be minimal at this point in time. But with that 35% rate staring Canada in the face, officials say that there have been conversations between the two countries. How that actually plays out in the 7-ish hours we have until the deadline, I think remains an open question. Also keeping an eye right now, obviously Mexico has been dealt with, at least given another 90 days. With the tariffs that were already in place. China has another week before their delay needs to be extended. That extension is expected, but Trump hasn't actually weighed in yet. One of the interesting elements here, Jake, is even for the major partners that have made deals and for the 150 plus other countries that are just waiting for some semblance of a sign about whether they're going to get a 10% universal tariff that Trump initially announced and was never delayed, or some other number, how it actually gets implemented. You know, you heard the White House press secretary say, we'll call them before midnight. We'll let them know. The president actually has to sign something to put them into place at 12:01 a.m. I was talking to a major importer earlier, said it's a really messy time right now because a lot of these countries don't know what their rate will be, haven't been told anything from the administration. The rush of last-minute efforts to clinch deals with the president from delegations from other countries has actually made it a little bit of a more complicated process, given Trump a lot of leverage, but nobody's really sure how this is going to land by midnight.
Yeah, the chaos, of course, is a feature, not a bug.
Absolutely.
Phil, what have been some of the practical effects of tariffs on big companies that we've seen so far? Earlier this week, we talked about Procter & Gamble raising prices, for example.
I think earnings season has been an enlightening moment for the actual impact that the tariffs can have on the corporate sector. I think from a price perspective, which is obviously what most in the audience would be most concerned about, we have seen the most vulnerable items that are the consumer-facing, electronics being the key in particular, autos as well, are areas where you're going to see price increases either already in place or you're starting to see them come over time. One of the interesting elements, Jake, is in talking to a lot of executives, particularly those in the wholesale retail industry, they say some of our members from trade groups have said some of their companies have held off. Right? One, there's a lot of uncertainty. They didn't know where rates were actually going to land. But two, nobody wanted to kind of be captured under the eye of Sauron of the president or his Truth Social account and wanted to wait and see what was going to happen. At some point, many of these executives say, prices are going to have to increase. It's just natural. One thing to keep in mind, Fed Chairman Jay Powell yesterday said we are still in the early stages of figuring out the actual effect here. The Trump administration believes the exporters, the exporting countries, will eat the majority of the tariffs. If they don't, then the companies will because of the value and leverage of the market. We're going to have to see how that plays out. There's no precedent for something like this And we haven't seen tariff rates, at least on net, this high since the 1930s.
What's the term that I've seen bandied about this week? Re-inflation? Is that what it's called? It has to do with the idea that inflation's going down, but now it might be going back up because of the tariffs.
It's been probably the biggest concern. It's also been one of the reasons you see Trump administration officials spiking the football right now of, hey, you all said there was going to be major jump in inflation. You all said there was going to be a recession. We haven't seen that at all. I think the concern right now is, again, I go back to Jay Powell and the Fed yesterday and also what the board kind of laid out as their analysis of the situation. There is an argument to be made that there will be a one-time price increase and then it will filter out through the system. There is also a concern, which is why the Fed has not raised rates, that this will be a far more durable increase in prices that may escalate over time. The biggest question I think that I have at this point is when you look at supply chains and how they actually work, are companies moving their supply chains? Are they relocating those supply chains? Are they going to run into major hiccups with those supply chains in the weeks and months ahead? Then you're talking about something like what we saw in the wake of COVID, maybe not to that scale.
Yeah.
This is very complicated, and I just think it's important to underscore that while the Trump administration is absolutely correct, there is a resilience to the U.S. economy, a resilience to the U.S. consumer. Consumer sentiment has certainly rebounded. The markets remain at all-time highs or around them, at least before today. There are concerns that have not necessarily been understood yet.
And also from when you sub for me, when we talk to the small business owners every day, a lot of these people have been trying to hold off and not raise prices or do layoffs, and they are now saying we have to do something in the next couple of months. So we could see lots of changes. Philip, always good to have you on. Thank you so much. Neil Kochel joins me now. He is the attorney for the small business plaintiffs in this lawsuit, arguing that Trump cannot use emergency powers to impose all these sweeping tariffs. He's also the former acting U.S. Solicitor General for President Obama. Neil, good to see you again. So back in May, your clients won this case in the Court of International Trade. Today, a panel of 11 appeals court judges in D.C. heard arguments. Some of them did seem skeptical of the Trump administration's arguments. Tell us what your argument is and what you thought the judges were, how they responded to your arguments.
Yeah, so I think this group of small businesses that I and the Liberty Justice Center represent are saying, look, these tariffs are not something that the president can impose by his own say-so. They require Congress. That's where our Constitution in Article 1, Section 8 locates that power for the most important of reasons, Jake, going all the way back to the Revolutionary War and the idea that kings and presidents are always tempted to use tariffs and taxation. And here what Donald Trump has done is impose the largest tax increase on Americans since Bill Clinton in 1993, a tax increase of $1,300 per American family. And what we said today is, look, maybe that's a good idea, maybe it's a bad idea, but that's something for Congress to decide, and no president has ever asserted the raw power to do this on his own.
With respect, Neil, Congress doesn't seem to care, right? I mean, Republicans control the House, the Republicans control the Senate. They seem perfectly willing just to hand over all their powers to President Trump on this issue and several others.
Yeah, that may be, but that's all the more reason why, if the president thinks this is so important and he needs it for leverage or negotiating authority and stuff like that, go to Congress and get it done. I mean, it's not like he's facing a Congress that's controlled by obstructionist Democrats or something. These are members of his own party, and yet he won't do it. Now, he tried in the first time he was president to get such legislation, and it failed. And I think that tells you all you need to know, which is this legislation will fail. And so you had the Trump attorney today, Jake, in court saying, well, if Congress doesn't like these tariffs, they can pass a law to remove them, which is not the way our constitutional system works. I mean, President Truman tried that with the seizure of the steel mills in 1952. He said to the Supreme Court, well, if Congress doesn't like it, they can pass a law. And the Supreme Court said, the Constitution requires Congress to act first, not the president.
So the Trump Justice Department argues there's no basis for the courts to review Trump's emergency declarations. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, the very first line of my argument today, Jake, was the Trump administration's argument boils down to simply this. I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, for however long as I want, and the courts have no business reviewing what I'm doing. And, that might be the law of some other country. It's certainly not the law of the United States.
The Trump administration also argues that the U.S. Supreme Court's recent decision tamping down universal injunctions by lower court judges means that the tariffs should not be blocked nationwide, even if tariffs are declared illegal. So what happens if Trump continues to lose the case in court, but he tries to use that logic to continue the tariffs until the U.S. Supreme Court, I guess, weighs in?
Yeah, that didn't really come up today. The Justice Department didn't push it, but I think for a good reason, because here, not just is this case brought by small businesses who, as I say, are really teetering on the edge because of these tariffs, but it was also brought by 12 different states. And in that nationwide injunction ruling that the Supreme Court issued that you're referring to, they said when states bring cases, it may be different. And that makes sense. Like Oregon is one of the plaintiff states here. If they win their case, you get lower tariffs in Oregon, but not in Wyoming. Like that just seems unworkable, and the Constitution itself has a uniformity requirement over tariffs.